Welcome to this introductory lecture video presentation on SketchUp and its introductory skills. This is meant as a kind of complement to my textbook on the complete SketchUp companion for interior design and also for architecture. And you might be wondering, why SketchUp? What advantages does this have over some other programs which are, say, more powerful or maybe more focused on rendering? And my answer to that is multifaceted. Basically, SketchUp is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. And in that, it can do many things. It kind of sits in the middle of a number of different types of software. Something more complicated like Revit or ArchiCAD or Nemetschek. Those are BIM, Building Information Modeling programs, specifically designed to have accessibility to a wide range of data about complex projects. They're great for really big projects, especially when you're doing construction drawings and construction management. Every object that you draw has complicated parameters. And so it's pretty easy to get bogged down pretty quickly by the detail level. And SketchUp is a modeler. It's a 3D modeler, but it has some information that can be added to elements, but it is also more sketchy. It is easily accessible for creating geometric elements, and yet it also has a side to it which is precise. You can draw things in an architectural manner to actual dimensions, and it has a vast library of architectural elements. So it's great for creating quick ideas. In fact, I think it's a place where great ideas get to work. Where did I get that phrase? Anyway, you can peruse the website as you see fit, but it has the ability to create simple models with really kind of an inventive quality to it without having to worry too much about a lot of the details. And then later on, you can in fact add in greater detail. You can also interoperate with other programs. SketchUp comes with a program called Layout, which allows you to produce construction drawings. And then you can also do fun things like share it electronically with people who do not have SketchUp. It can be viewed on different devices, and besides computers, this is also tablets, but in virtual and augmented reality. It's a very powerful piece of software, and you can even use it to print in 3D, and it accepts a wide range of formats, and it exports to a wide range of formats. So it's super duper handy. And you might say, how can I find the right one for me? I sound like an advertisement. I should get a kickback from these guys. Sadly, I don't. But I am an educator, and I do get a discounted version of SketchUp. And it's quite cheap, really, for all that it does. And for students, of course, it also is cheap. And it's an easy download. It is not super system heavy, and it is also Mac and PC. And I do have some videos on the Mac version, which actually in some ways I kind of prefer, but I'm going to be showing only PC in this little effort. So let's take a look at the interface of SketchUp. And if you are even the least bit familiar with other 3D modeling programs, and even something like AutoCAD or Photoshop, there's a basic arrangement to these things. Typically, there's the sort of address bar up at the top here that says what program you're in. I always wish I could get rid of that. Takes up valuable pixels on my tiny screen. There are pull-down menus with lists of commands. Some of them are going to be very familiar, open, save, new, import, export, print, all that kind of good stuff, recent documents. There's editing menus and view menus, camera tools. Obviously, this is a 3D modeler, so the metaphor of a camera and its field of view and perspective and all that are in effect. Finally, the sort of main operation of the program is with drawing tools and editing tools. And those are the two main operations. You basically are creating objects and then modifying them. Now, up across the top here, I have just the standard toolbar that shows up. Actually, I had the standard one and also the kind of default tools. The standard one is all the usual stuff, a new button and a open and save and redo and undo and print. Of course, those are common across all programs. Some of the toolbar buttons are going to look very familiar if you have used other programs, for example, Revit or AutoCAD. The arrow tool is the select command, and I'm going to go through each one of these one by one. But in general, these are the basic drawing tools. These are the basic editing tools. Here are some fun annotation tools. And finally, there's some view tools. And last at the end here are kind of Trimble tools. Trimble are the good folks that bring us SketchUp, and they have their own special things. Now, on the right side is the tool tray. You can get rid of this, or you can minimize all the elements in here. These are each kind of tool palettes. One that is handy for new users is the instructor palette. And what this does is if you click on a tool, say the pencil tool or the line, it will give you fun tool tips, how to use the tool, a little video, and it also has a very important thing, which is modifier keys. So many tools perform multiple functions. In this case, the line tool can also, you can lock its inference in different directions. You can hit escape to cancel. There's a whole number of different things. And it also has the written out step-by-step kind of directions, which is, of course, super handy if you are a person who learns by reading. Now, some of us learn by just clicking around and see what happens. If you're that kind of person, down at the bottom of the screen, usually when you click a tool, and I'll start this tool, it will give you these same options right down here. It'll prompt you. So if I click the arrow keys, for example, you see how my line jumps in different directions just by tapping the arrow key. And that's what it's telling me down at the bottom. You may not understand what does toggle lock inference direction mean, and we will get to that at some point in the near future. Finally, the last button down at the bottom is the kind of value control box or the measurements box. Depending on what tool you are using, you'll get different things. So for example, as I draw this line, you see how, and as I move my cursor, the length of the object changes. And you can actually type a value. So for example, it says 18'1", but maybe I only want 12 feet. If I type in 12 feet and enter, it will complete the line at that specific dimension. So super handy. You can see how the tools are, that's a really small number of tools, but you can draw a lot. Okay, so let's try drawing some stuff. First of all, I'm just going to go left to right, and we'll go through each tool one by one. First of all, the select tool is very easy to use. You just click the select tool and click on an object. Boom, it's selected. And if you hold down shift, you can add objects to the selection menu. If you hold down shift and click on an object that's already selected, it will deselect. And you can do other things. For example, shift plus control only subtracts. And then if you just have control, it only adds. So for example, if I click on this now, it won't do anything other than add it. Don't double click on it because that edits it. The erase tool, I think you can probably guess what this does. Boom, it makes it go away. A fun trick though is if you hold down shift and erase, it looks like the line went away, but it's actually just hidden. If I go here to the view, hidden geometry option under my toolbar, there it is. Oh, and I missed it so much. And if I want it back, I can actually just click on it, right-click on the object. When you right-click on objects in SketchUp, as in most of our software, a context menu pops up. And in fact, you use this all the time. SketchUp is always guessing, what do you want to do with that? In this case, I just want to unhide the object. And now when I turn off the display of hidden geometry, my line is happily returned home. Oh, I feel so much better. Okay, the next tool is the pencil tool. And what's great about the pencil tool is it works very similar to a pencil if your pencil was connected to a straight edge. And basically, you can click once to start a line, and this connecting line that you see now is what is typically called a rubber band tool. And you can use the cursor to just kind of click and draw happily. Now what you'll see as I draw, there are a number of inferences. The most important one is this colored inference. This is the these are related to the colors of the axes. So for example, blue is up, green is Y, and red is X. And these can go, positive and negative. And if you're going in that particular direction and you hold down Shift, it will lock it in that direction. See how if I'm going in this green direction, I hold down Shift, my red line gets a little darker. It also says on green axis. And I can use the arrow keys to achieve the same thing. I just tapped the right arrow key, and it got me going in the correct direction. The left arrow key goes in the green one, and the up or down arrow keys get you going in the vertical direction. And I'm just going to click and drag my scroll wheel so I can do what's called orbit the model. And now you can see these lines are going in 3 dimensions. By the way, those quick keyboard, or not keyboard, but mouse shortcuts, clicking and dragging your scroll wheel orbits, clicking and dragging your scroll wheel and your left mouse button does what's called panning. And again, if you're new to any 3D drawing program, I would definitely recommend reading the thorough description of all these tools in the textbook. I'm going to assume that you have some familiarity with these tools. Now, you might say, that's it? That's all SketchUp can do with lines? Well, there are other line tools hidden underneath this tool. And all you have to do is click on the itty-bitty little teeny tiny down arrow next to a tool that has that down arrow. And this is similar to something like Photoshop. They've hidden some other good tools in there. The freehand tool works in a similar way. You can click and drag and create a curvy line. You can't click and draw like you can with the line tool. You can, however, connect objects. You'll notice as before I've started drawing, if I move my mouse over an end point or a midpoint of an existing line, that SketchUp's smart cursor will recognize that point and it will give you that highlight. There's all sorts of great ways that you can create geometry, and this is one that's fun. I'm going to connect these 2 lines by going from endpoint to endpoint. And this shows you another cool feature of SketchUp, which is it can draw solid faces. Now, I don't mean solid as in you can, eat off of them like a piece of cheese, but they are, in fact, filled in. It's a line that is continuous, forming a continuous loop. It's actually a series of line segments. And when they are all connected, they fill in to create an area. And I can use any of these tools, really, to fill in these areas. I'm just going to use a line to connect these endpoints, and you see how it will fill them in. The only trick is it always has to be flat. So for example, if I connect this point here to this 3-dimensional point, nothing is going to happen because they don't form any flat surface. However, if I connect these 2 points, or these 2 points, now it will create different surfaces. Because it is a surface modeler, every surface has to have a boundary, and the boundary can be made up of any of these linear tools. What other linear tools do we have, you might ask? Well, we have arcs. And arcs come in multiple flavors depending on what you're trying to do. The little drawing icon indicates how they work. And of course, it also has the written description here in the instructor, which I'm leaving up. And like many tools, it has a lot of modifier keys. I'm not going to go into every single one in this video. But the point here is you set a center point, a start for the arc, or a spring point, and then you can set the radial dimension, okay, or the angle. And as you can see, it's a linear element. We can join it with other linear elements. Let's choose a different kind of arc. This kind of arc, I believe you draw the two endpoints, and then you draw the spring point. Now, one trick with arcs, you will notice that the arc can go vertical or horizontal. You can use the arrow keys. I'm going to force it to go vertical and make myself a little three-dimensional heart. And that is true of any three-dimensional object. They can be created in such a manner that they can be drawn in any plane. They can also be rotated. Now, there are other types of shapes that we have here. One that's kind of the building block of much of our architectural stuff is rectangles. And I would encourage you all to try each of these tools at least once as we're doing the video. Just tap the old space bar and give them a try. And rectangles are great because much of architecture is rectilinear. And you just click and once to start the rectangle and click again to finish it. What you'll see down here, by the way, is dimensions for that rectangle. Those can be changed. I haven't started any new tool yet. I haven't clicked on anything. Immediately after you draw a rectangle, and only immediately, can you change that. And I'm going to type in, say, 12 feet, comma, 12 feet, and hit enter. You see how it changes the size of the object, and I can go back and do the same thing, type in a new dimension, and it will make it bigger. I can also type in comma 12 feet, and it will just change the second dimension, or 12 feet, comma, and it will change the first dimension. So lots of fun options there. There are other types of rectangles, and you might say, well, a rotated rectangle, okay, I think that can make sense. And what that does, it allows you to draw in a vertical plane. As you can see here, I've clicked once to define one edge of the rectangle, and then I can click again, and there we go. I have a rectangle which is rotated up in the vertical plane. And but there's another one which is a circle, and you might say, wait a second, a circle is not really a rectangle. Well, the truth is, if you look down here in the measurements box, there's a number here, 24. I'll draw a circle with 24 sides. Zoom in on it. And what you'll see is that the circle is actually faceted. So if I start a new circle, oops, if I launch the circle tool, but I type in, say, 12 for the number of sides, now it will draw a much more faceted circle. And in fact, if I once again launch the tool and type in, say, 4 for the number of sides, I'm going to end up with a square. So that's how I can square the circle. And as you might imagine, there is a polygon tool, which is basically the circle tool, starting with a small number of sides. So if I make it 100 sides, that polygon ends up being a pretty smooth circle. And this does make a difference later on when you are modeling. A smoother circle is going to give you a smoother result when it comes to rendering. Now, this is the one downside of SketchUp as compared to, say, a program like 3ds Max or V-Ray, which when you create models, or Rhino, I suppose I should say, when you create models in those programs, they are solid models, which is to say they are basically three-dimensional geometric algorithms. A circle or a tube is defined by a little algorithm, a little math equation, and that equation allows you to make a perfectly smooth surface. SketchUp really doesn't have perfectly smooth surfaces. And this is its one limitation. It's hard to get kind of soft, organic shapes without really kind of bogging down the program significantly. But that said, the speed of a surface modeler is unparalleled. So, okay, that is it for the drawing tools. What about the editing tools? This next little batch of tools are editing tools, and you can basically modify things that you've created already. And I will start with the push-pull tool. And the push-pull tool always reminds me of Play-Doh. You click on the tool, it will highlight a surface which it can modify. You click and drag on the surface, or you can also just click and move your mouse and click. And it will basically extrude that surface and make it kind of like Play-Doh squeezed through one of those Play-Doh devices. And you can push-pull up or push-pull down. And you can see down in the bottom here, there is a value in the value box there, the measurements box. If I click a second time, I can also type in 5 feet. And, whoops, I can type in 5 feet if I don't have thick thumbs, and change the value very quickly. So it's a great way to see what kinds of shapes you can create using these basic things that you draw in plan. And anything that is a flat surface can be extruded in this manner. It doesn't really matter which plane it was drawn in. In fact, it doesn't even matter if it's rectilinear or not. See how any object can be modified. And you might say, well, why does this one have lines? Just so happens that because I created it with the polygon tool, it does draw in those edge lines because sometimes they're useful. What's fun about that is you can actually push-pull those surfaces and create some pretty funky shapes. And in fact, the shapes that you push-pull, you can push-pull those shapes. So there's all sorts of options for how you can create different objects. In this case, push-pull is very effective. The other thing that you can do is you can push-pull a surface. I'm going to click on this one, but I can move my mouse over another surface, and you see how it makes reference to that surface? So it's a great way to align different surfaces. Now these are all exactly at the same height, even though I don't have to draw in any reference lines to get there. So the other thing that you can do is if you hold down Control and tap push-pull. This is one of the options that you'll see down at the bottom. I'll tap Control. A little teeny tiny plus sign shows up, whoops, shows up next to my cursor. You can see it there. That little plus sign indicates that it's going to make a copy. I'm going to hit Escape here to get out of the zoom mode. And you might say, well, why would you do that? I don't need a copy. Well, one fun thing you can do is if you select a circle like this, and I go to Entity Info. And this is kind of like the Properties menu in AutoCAD or in Revit. You can change certain parametric features, not the number of segments in this case because it's connected to other objects, but I can change the dimension. I'll type in 12 and enter. And by the way, all dimensions in SketchUp are in inches, at least using the template that I'm using. And so if you're using metric, of course, you're going to type in centimeters, I believe is the default in metric. Just be aware if you want feet, type in the little foot, single apostrophe. Anyway, and there you go, you see I've created a cone. And this is great. You can still see all the facets. I'm going to show hidden geometry here, or hidden lines. Whoops. Show hidden geometry, and you'll see all these individual lines which are existing here. If I show those lines, I can now access each of these individual pieces and push-pull them. If I don't show those hidden lines or hidden geometry, I see how I cannot push-pull that line. This is called smoothing. And smoothing is a fun thing. It just makes it look a little, well, you know, smooth. And something like this object here, I can smooth it so we don't see those lines. The way that you do that, I could select the object just by clicking on it and clicking on every line and holding down Shift. SketchUp has a couple of selection tools which make life easier. First of all, I can use a selection window. And this is, if you remember your AutoCAD or Revit, anything that falls entirely within the window gets selected. If I use a crossing window, and you can see it uses the same AutoCAD-esque dashed line, anything that touches that box will get selected. Those are your sort of basic selection tools. However, SketchUp has two others that are for quick selecting of 3D objects. In this case, if I double-click on a surface, it will select the surface and all its bounding edges. If I triple-click on the object, it will select the surface, all its bounding edges, and all other surfaces and bounding edges that touch that one until it gets to basically space. You see how now I've selected the entire object. And the whole point of this little discussion was to get the object selected and smooth it. To smooth it, just right-click on it, and in the context menu, you'll find a number of fun options, but the simplest one, the one that's working for us, is Soften Smooth Edges. And now you'll see in your tool tray here, let me close some of these other menus so you can see it, there is the Soften Edges tool, and you can drag this over and it will get it smoother and smoother or less smooth. And in fact, if I drag it all the way over, those lines reappear. And I usually check this Soften Coplanar. Sometimes if you have kind of lots of subsurfaces that you've drawn, but they end up being a smooth one, a solid surface or a continuous surface anyway, then you can smooth those right out. And there you go. You have an object which looks the same as the others. Our next editing tool over is the Offset tool. There it is. And Offset is great because you can take any object and, well, almost any object, and offset it and create a secondary boundary. And let me just draw a simple circle here. Oh, except we want one with more than 4 sides. Let's go with 24, draw a simple circle. And with the Offset tool, it works similar to push-pull in that it recognizes a surface. You click once to define where the offset is going. You can also type in a dimension. So for example, if I just want it 12 inches and in this direction, once it's going in the direction I want, just type in 12 and it will offset it. And I can push-pull up or down the piece. And the other interior piece I can do separately. And even on an object which is 3D, you can offset that surface. And again, if you have specific dimensions you want, you could do this till the cows come home and create kind of a, I don't know, ziggurat kind of effect. Again, just push-pull as you see fit. There you go. So Offset, very handy tool. And like our other tools, it does have a bunch of options that you can play around with. The Move tool is actually probably the most handy tool out there. And Move, one of the advantages is that any object that is selected, this is where you can both move it dimensionally but also make copies. So let me select an object. By the way, to activate the selection command, just tap the space bar. And you might say, how do I know how to get all these keyboard shortcuts? Well, let me show you. Well, I went to the good old SketchUp website and I downloaded their keyboard shortcuts. This is the one for Windows, and it has every tool icon and what it does. And it even does have some of the basic instructions for all sorts of different tools. Every tool has different sort of options. And my advice is, and I'm going to make you do it in class, is just memorize them. Just learn what the image, the icon is representing, and what the tool is, at least in name. Using them is probably the best way to learn how they all work, but the first step is just to know what they are so you don't spend half the class looking for the freehand drawing tool button or the view previous button. You want to learn those tools first. Okay, so back in our model, you select whatever it is that you want to move, all the select tool options, shift and control, all those are typical. Click the move command or tap M, that's the keyboard shortcut. And again, refer to that card if you can't remember. I believe the instructor also will tell you that, well, maybe not. Okay, doesn't show you the keyboard shortcut, but they're also in the menus. So if you go and you look under the menus, you'll see a little keyboard shortcut on the right. Anyway, you click on a base point, and note that base point does not have to be on the object. And the reason I mention that is because everything is in 3D in SketchUp, and it's very easy to accidentally move things toward you in 3D space. So you have to be very careful. I prefer to click on the ground when I have an object that wants to move on the ground. And one of the reasons is it's very easy to accidentally move something up in space without noticing that blue line was very faint. So if I'm having trouble getting an object to move in a complex model, just clicking on the ground, maybe holding down Shift or using the arrow keys to lock the inference in a particular direction will allow you to get a nice clean move without accidentally moving something up into space. The Move tool is multifaceted, like we all are, and with the Move tool, this is also the copy tool. There is no separate copy command. So if I want to make copies of this object, I just select the objects, invoke the Move command, but before I do anything, tap the Control button. And what you will see is a little teeny tiny plus sign show up next to my cursor, and I'll just zoom in on that a little bit so you can see it. There's the little plus sign. And what that is indicating is that you're making a copy. And now when I make my copy, and I'll move it over, I'll move it in the red direction, the green direction. There you go, I've made myself a copy. And one cool thing about the Move command is, one, you can type in a dimension. So if I wanted that to go 30 feet, I can change it only immediately after the Move tool command has been invoked. But the other thing I can do is I can type in modifiers, and I believe this is in the tool description here somewhere. And first of all, if I type in X, oops, except I have to do it right after I invoke the tool. Let me just modify this. Okay, there we go. If I make a copy and I type in times 3, x3, it will make 3 copies. I can change my mind and make it x2. I can also type in /2, and it will make copies in the middle. And then I can change the dimension that these are spread out. And you see how you can pretty quickly get objects spaced very evenly. Whoops, type in 60 feet, /3. It'll squeeze 3 in there. It's a great tool for creating an array of objects. Okay. Now, this array, the one problem with this array is that each of these is unique, or maybe you consider that, a good feature, right? If I wanted to move each of these, I'm just tapping the space bar to select and M to move. I can create a kind of fun little, I don't know what these are, I'm not sure what you'd even call them, but I can create a series of copies that are unique. Now, frequently, we don't do that. Frequently we want to create an array of objects like, say, I don't know, a column or something like that are repeated and can be changed together so that they all change. And what we can do, there's 2 options in SketchUp. Well, I guess there's 3. There's one is do nothing, and I'm going to make some copies of this guy so we can see the options. Times 2. There we go. So now I have 3 copies of this object, and the first one, as we saw, if I move copy it, each one is unique. Now, the second one, I'm going to turn it into what's called a group. And again, other programs have this same functionality. I'm going to right-click on it and choose Make Group. And there you can see there's a bounding box around this thing. And now I can't select individual elements. When I click on this, it selects the whole kit and caboodle. To get at those individual elements, I have to double-click on it. And now I'm inside the group. See how there's a gray bounding box? And I just click outside of the bounding box to close it. So that's one option. The other option SketchUp offers is what's called a component. And again, this is familiar terminology to many of you. I'll select these objects, right-click on it, and choose Make Component. And I'll call it, I don't know, Salt Shaker. And I'm not going to discuss the other options right now. But each of these has their own unique characteristics when they're copied. I'm just going to make a copy, move, control, and make several copies. Here, we'll make more than that because it's so nice. There we go. And the big difference here is with the individual ungrouped or uncomponented options, each element is unique, so I could easily modify it. And this is great if, like, let's say you just want to make some quick changes. I'm going to activate the Move tool, and I'm going to grab each object with nothing selected. The Move tool will just grab whatever it thinks you're going to edit or whatever you want to edit, and it will modify that immediately. So this is great if you're just playing around and you want to experiment with shapes. Now, if you want to, say, move shapes and have each one individual, but you want to move them or maybe overlap them, for example, having them as groups is really handy. And the reason is, if you have two objects and you move them over each other, SketchUp has a fun feature, which is super annoying, which is that objects get sticky. So when you try to move objects that touch each other, suddenly they get all sticky, and they move with whatever they have touched. Now this can be cool because you can create weird shapes, but more often than not, you don't want to do that. So you can, move these objects individually that way. You can still edit them. I can come in and, make funny shapes out of each one, and it will not affect the others, but I have to take that extra step of double-clicking on the object in order to make changes. And it means that the geometry remains independent. I can move these apart or together if I want. And this is great for one-off items such as, interior partitions, or things like furniture elements, which you don't want to stick to each other. You want to be able to move them independently. Now, the final model option is the component option. And for that one, when you edit one, they all will change. And you see how the rest of my model has gotten grayed out, but slightly less grayed are these other components. And in fact, if while I'm editing a component, I can in fact hide the rest of the model or hide similar components. I actually have a keyboard shortcut I've set for that because it's nice to be able to toggle that on or off. And now what happens is if I say move some object, see how they all change, and now I have a box of, crayons or something like that. So, and then click outside of it to finish editing the object. So experiment with each of those three, and you'll find that they are quite unique when used in conjunction with the move or really move copy command. Okay, so that is that tool. The other tools on the edit toolbar, rotate is a pretty similar one to most other programs. Obviously, you do have to have an object selected. So here, let's select our strange object here. Oh no, let's do that. I'm going to make a group out of it so it's easier. Make group. If you select the rotate tool, a protractor shows up on your screen. You click once to define the base point of, or sort of the fulcrum of the rotation, once to define the starting point, and then once to define the rotational angle. And you can put that protractor on any surface. So for example, I can rotate this in the vertical dimension. The other thing is you can tap Control and make a rotated array using that same X multiplier. And there we go. I can change how far apart they are, and even the number of degrees apart by tapping in the number. So all sorts of interesting ways, things that you can create using that rotated array. Now, another tool that is fun, for those of you who find this kind of thing fun, is the Scale tool. If you click on an object, and by the way, here's a fun fact, if you select, say, a component and a group, and you activate the Scale command, interesting enough, they will both scale independently. So I've scaled the component by grabbing the grips here. However, if I want to scale all the components, I have to edit the component and now use the Scale command. And you see how it will modify each each other component. However, it will modify this one based on the proportions of the modified component. So you can actually get yourself into a little bit of trouble, especially if you're dealing with repeated architectural elements like columns. Just make sure that you know what you're doing when it comes to creating those. Okay, the last set of tools are actually ones I have been using without telling you because, I don't know, I was just feeling naughty today. And one is the Orbit tool. This is the one that you get by clicking and dragging your scroll wheel. You can see my cursor becomes this icon, and in fact, the icon is even highlighted up here. Or you could just click on it and activate it that way. And it will orbit around what it perceives as the center of geometry in your project, by the way. So if you've selected an object and click the Orbit tool, it doesn't care. It will orbit only around that, the entire model. So sometimes it's easy to get a little bit lost. The Pan tool, again, you can activate it by clicking and dragging the scroll wheel and the left button, or you can just click the hand button. Zoom is another fun one. You can zoom in and out, but here is a fun feature. Zoom also controls the field of view. If you look down in the lower right, it says the field of view. And this is great if you want something to say seem, oh, I don't know, like an interior view. You can type a much higher field of view. I'll click and drag and scroll in, and you can see how these now look sort of much more monumental. The 3D effect is much more dramatic, whereas if I change it back to something, let's say 28 degrees, and these are old camera dimensions, and I click back, it will tend to flatten the image, much more of a kind of, I don't know, streetscape, I suppose. And a lot of that depends on your personal preference. And then this Zoom Extents button, very handy for getting you out of trouble, which is because sometimes you'll get inside like an object and you'll be inside looking around and you can't see anything and you don't know where you are and you're trying to help, get me out of here. Zoom Extents just zooms out to everything it can find. And sometimes what will happen is you'll find like a chair or a tree about 100 miles out in the distance here, and you can't figure out why your model is operating so slowly. Hit that Zoom Extents, and it will find any lost, lonely objects out in outer space. The last part of the toolbar requires you to sign in. So you do need to go and sign in. I am signed in. How about that? And of course, you can't really use the software without signing in. And these are the Trimble tools. And the first one is really the most fun one. And this is actually the 3D warehouse. And frankly, this is the one that most people have fun with when they are playing with SketchUp and first getting to use it, especially little kids. So for example, let's say I want a model. Let's not start with something complicated. Let's start with a sofa. If you type in the word sofa, it will show you all the sofas it has. Now, unfortunately, it does default to this products section. And these are from manufacturers, and I find that some of them are good and some of them are not so good. I mean, either this guy's really tall or this sofa's really low. But if you go to the models section, what you'll find is both products from manufacturers, but also user uploaded content. And these can be loaded right into your project. You just click on the down arrow. Well, first of all, if you just click on the image, it'll show you the image. Sometimes there's a 3D option. And if you click download, it can load it right into your model. And I think my model is really big. So this object will be really small. And lo and behold, it is here. We'll put it next to this lady because she's probably tired of standing there. And there it is. It's an object which is in my model. I can zoom in on it. And any component, or group for that matter, if you have it selected and you've activated the move command, well, you can move it, but you can also use these rotational grips up here. I'm just going to click and drag on that, and you can see how the cursor actually wants to kind of snap to 90 degrees. You can do other dimensions as well, but that's a great way if you're laying out something like furniture or trees or street elements to quickly get a whole bunch in there in different orientations. In fact, you can, if you're feeling ornery, you can rotate this thing up and put it up on the ceiling or something like that. But anyway, let's leave it on the ground for now. So that's how you can populate your model pretty quickly with all sorts of content, and you can type in whole buildings or elements of buildings. There's even battleships and submarines and things like that. Not always appropriate for most projects. There are a couple of other things which we will get to in more advanced videos. The extension warehouse. This is really a powerful feature of SketchUp where you can add functionality that other people have created. Like I said, SketchUp is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. This is like adding more blades, get that fish scaler in there or your metal file in addition to the basic blade and, can opener. And again, you can download stuff for free mostly. Layout is that separate program which is great for putting together construction drawings and other types of presentations using your SketchUp model. And what it will do, it's kind of AutoCAD or Revit style viewports where you can have a sheet of paper with viewports into your main model, and any changes to your model will be reflected in that sheet. Very handy if you are doing a straight non-rendered view of your project. And finally, there's an extension manager. And Trimble also has a way to upload documents to their cloud, which allows you access to the SketchUp app, which is great. It works on the iPad, and you can't model on the app, but you can view your models and saved views, and also see it in augmented reality. So that's it for the basics of SketchUp. Give each of those tools a try. So how can we actually draw something architectural using SketchUp? Well, the most basic thing that we do as architects, and this is something that's really handy to draw in SketchUp, are basic massing drawings. And we can look at anything, and I'm going to take a good old Cape Cod house from here in New England and try to model it in SketchUp. And of course, massing drawings, we leave out a lot of detail, the shingle patterns and the brick patterns and all the little ins and outs. And we basically are going for the simple geometric shape. And this is a great way to practice using SketchUp. And I've started a new drawing here. And my project, by the way, uses the architectural template. Some of you may prefer to use other templates. Certainly the metric template makes the most sense for metric people. And basically to create that shape, most things in SketchUp begin with some kind of simple shape. In this case, I think I'm just going to draw it as a rectangle on the ground, and I like to start near the origin. And I could be all precise and say, it's actually 30 feet by 25 feet or something like that. However, I think for the initial drawings, something like massing, we can probably estimate based on the size of this person and the size in our image. We can use push-pull, and I'm using the keyboard shortcuts, by the way, so I tapped P for push-pull, and pull it up. And again, you might want to look at the image and see where the line of the bottom of the roof is. And now, how am I going to make that roof? Well, it's pretty straightforward. SketchUp has that sticky geometry we mentioned. I mentioned. So if I draw a line, and I'm going to draw it from the midpoint to the midpoint, because we know if you kind of think of that building and its roof plan, the roof is right in the middle, right? It's the ridge line. I can now select the ridge line, tap the move command. I'll even tap the up arrow so that the object will only move up. And now I can drag the roof up. Now I could use something like the rotate command and draw maybe a reference line to get myself the exact dimension, but I could also just look at the picture and decide if that looks about right. I can zoom around in the model. If it seems too short or too long, I could move it. If it's too tall or too short, put yourself in a view where you can select just the roof. See how I used a selection window to grab just the roof? And you can move it up or down. Now, there are other features that I could add, for example, a dormer. And dormers are a little more tricky because obviously now we have a rectangular roof that's tilted up at an angle. There are so many different ways to create objects and have them connect to your model. I think I'll show you the first one just using lines. And what you can do is, because we know the axial dimensions here, I'm going to assume the dormer starts at the edge of the building. I can just draw the line up using the blue axis until it looks like it's about the right shape. I'm going to draw it as a box vertically, again using those references. I'm going to pull it out the other way because it's a little hard actually to draw up against this building. Everything gets very sticky. But here I can now draw the ridge line of the dormer, and this is assuming that it's a gabled dormer. You see how now I have this dormer kind of sitting out here in outer space. And if I want to, I'm going to make a copy of it so that I can show you two different methods here. Move, copy by tapping Control, grab a point along this ridge, and I'll make a copy over there. Now, the first option, if it just starts like this, where the face of the dormer is parallel with the face of the building, I can use a fun option, which is select nothing. I've tapped the select tool, clicked on nothing. Now when I tap the move command, I can get whatever object I want to move will be highlighted. I'm going to grab this endpoint, and I'm just going to drag it until it meets the building. Now I can do the same with this endpoint, again going in the green direction. Eventually you'll see this on face option. You can see my dormer is looking a little funky right now, but as soon as I get it on the face here, I've got myself a nice clean dormer. I can pull this, and there's my lovely dormer. Now, what if the dormer occurs higher up? Often the dormer is offset from the edge of the roof. Well, now if I move this and try to move it up, it will absolutely not want to go because it's glued to the ridge. So I'm going to use the grouping feature to make the model detach from the rest of the geometry. Now I can move it up, again using that on-face tooltip, and I can stretch out the dormer as I did before. Okay, and then obviously you'd want to place the back face wherever you think it belongs and use the same stretching feature. Now, what if you have something like a chimney? We've ruined our reference area here. Well, now we can just draw that totally separate. I'll draw that on the ground here. Again, I'm just estimating. And I'm not sure how high it should go, but I know it should go to at least that point, and then a little higher. Now I can triple click on the chimney and bring it into position. Now I'm going to lock the green axis, grab it by its midpoint, and move it right into the middle of my little house. Now, right now I can see that there's no line there. It hasn't actually connected to the rest of the building. What I can do is select everything, and it does seem like it knows it's touching it, but I'm going to right-click on the objects and choose Intersect with Everything, and now you'll see those lines have appeared. You may also see a rectangle on the bottom on the ground there, which we could easily get rid of if it bothers you, although you don't really see that view particularly ever. And now there we have it, our funky little dormer Cape Cod house.